Okay, everyone, welcome to this month's Ask an Expert. Let's see, we'll be talking about Linux on Intel SOC FPGAs. We have with us Finlay Shear, Rod Fraser, who was actually out, and then Jay Krimke for Wind River. So Finlay Shear, so he's been an Intel employee for 10 years, senior product marketing manager for open source software tools and enablement. He has lots of years of experience in the embedded industry there and 15 years experience in open source projects. So we have a great expert here to join us today. And then Rod Fraser, he been with Intel, slash Altera for 20 years, embedded technology specialist FAE. So he helps your customers out with field type questions, supports designs that can make use of the embedded development and debugging tools in the Quartus software using Platform Designer and System Console, Time Analyzer, and Signal Tap. 35 years of experience in the embedded systems and software development space. And then Jay Kripke from Wind River, Senior Product Line Manager for Linux. Integrated use of social media for client collaboration, product positioning, and driving future product directions. Evangelize the capabilities of future directions for enterprise products and some other roles that he has, marketing, technical architecture, team manager, briefing center staff presenter, SAP systems management consultant, system programmer, and administrator. So we'd like to welcome our guest today and thank you for joining us to help fill these questions. Hi, my name is Steve Elzinga. I'll be your moderator today, and I'll be the one to direct the questions to our experts. So there's a couple ways that you can do this. You can always use the audio, so everyone should be on mute. And if you wouldn't mind keeping yourselves on mute to minimize any background noise, that'd be great. If you do have a question or a comment, feel free to unmute yourself, ask away. Submit your question or your comment or whatever. We're happy to indulge these questions about Linux and Wind River systems. If you prefer not to use the audio, go ahead and type your question in the chat window. I have the chat window open, ready to go, so I'm monitoring that as well. We do also, so if you all can't think of, if you all don't have any questions, at the moment, that's we do have some questions that came in during the registration process. So if I see that there's no questions, either through the audio or the chat window, I'll be drawing on those questions, those pre-registration questions as well. So just so you're aware about that. All right. Ground rules. So any questions you think of about Linux on SoC devices or embedded systems designs is fair game. Again, using the audio or in the chat. If it's very detailed, design specific, we'll do our best to try to answer your question, but we may have to refer you to a local FE. So just be aware of that. We do want to try to address your question. So hopefully your question can be answered in a reasonable amount of time during the session. Now we'll try to follow up with you later. We want to get as many questions from as many folks as we can. And like I mentioned before, we end up having to point you in the direction of your local FAE if the question ends up being a little bit more complicated than what we expect. Okay, and with that, I will turn the time over to Finlay. Finlay will direct me to advance the slides as we go through here.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. So, hello everyone. I'd like to begin with a brief overview of Intel's SoC FPGAs. I'm going to start from a hardware perspective, but quickly migrate to the software components and the ecosystem that supports these devices. So for designs that use an FPGA and a separate CPU, an Intel SoC FPGA should be considered. It is likely to provide a comparable, even superior functionality and performance, but with lower board space, lower power consumption, and lower system cost. So integrating these technologies on the same piece of silicon eliminates the cost of one of the packages, saving board space. In addition, as the signals between the processor and the FPGA now reside in the same piece of silicon, communication between the two consumes substantially less power compared to using separate ICs. The integration of thousands of internal connections between the processor and the FPGA leads to substantially higher bandwidth and lower latency compared to a two-chip solution. Some of the things about the hardware side of the SoC FPGA from a software perspective, Intel, we are all in on open source. Intel SoC FPGA software strategy includes upstream first to the mainline kernel, with the goal of being on the latest versions of software components, with the latest features, with the latest bugs fixes, and the latest security patches. Intel offers choices of bootloaders, choices of kernels. So in the case of bootloaders, we have the U-boot as well as the untrusted firmware bootloaders, and we offer both the mainline and long-term support, or LTS kernel. We use the Yocto project build tool. We do basic enablement in Intel, and then our primary partner, Wind River, offers a commercial distribution. You can accelerate your project development and time to market with Intel's supported and maintained reference designs. So these are reference designs that are kept up to date every quarter with the latest versions of software components and tools. Examples include partial reconfiguration, secure boot, PCIe root port, and many, many others. We also, our software stack also includes advanced crypto services enabled by our secure device manager. And these crypto services are the basic encryption and authentication, but also have some sophisticated services like vendor authorized boot and many more. An important asset in support of Intel's SOC FPGAs open source software is rocketboards.org. It's a community wiki delivering the latest documentation, support, how-tos, and latest product news. From a software development on SOC FPGA, Intel provides two IDEs, the ARM Development Studio for Intel SOC FPGAs, and now the new Ashling risk-free IDE for Intel FPGAs. With the ARM Development Studio for Intel SOC FPGAs, Intel continues to deliver the premium ARM Development Studio, the ARM industry standard IDE at a value price point that's a fraction of the normal price. With the latest development environment, Intel delivers the Ashling risk-free IDE, again for Intel FPGAs. It includes a compiler, debugger, and trace. For Intel's new softcore processor, the RISC-V, we call it the NEOS 5 softcore processor, as well as ARM processors. And a key feature of the risk-free IDE is heterogeneous debug, where you're able to debug NEOS 5 and ARM processors simultaneously and all at zero cost. Intel's comprehensive ecosystem for SOC FPGAs includes operating system, development tools, IP, and professional services. We work very closely with Wind River, keeping in sync with versions of software components used by Wind River Linux to ensure there's a smooth transition from Intel's Yocto project-based enablement distribution to Wind River's Yocto project-based commercial distributions, both source and binary. So now I will hand it over to Jay at Wind River.
All right. Well, thank you very much. My introduction, I'm Jay Kremke. I'm the product line manager for Wind River Linux. And we've had a very interesting partnership with Intel over various chipsets, but in particular the FPGA chips. I'll talk a bit more about it in a moment. But Wind River is really kind of focused on delivering complete software solutions for the intelligent edge. If you can go forward to the next slide, please. So Wind River has been a global leader. We've been founded in 1981. We've got thousands of customers right now, billions of deployed devices. We support obviously Linux, which I'm going to talk more about today, but we do have an RTOS, VxWorks, and a hypervisor, the Helix virtualization platform, that are also used in combination with Linux for some platforms that require safety critical type support. I'll also point out that our VxWorks platform is in use in a number of aviation and aerospace applications, including the James Webb Space Telescope. So we've had a long history of supporting the embedded environment. And in particular around Linux, we do support, or we do use the Yocto project, and that's kind of the basis for our solutions here. Next slide, please. So we're in the midst of a bit of a transformation. There are a lot of people that have traditionally developed for the edge type environment, have really focused on kind of single point products, deploy them, build them, deploy them, forget about them, and never touch them again. And we're seeing really a digital transformation in that arena where people are not just interested in, creating something and deploying it one time. They actually need to evolve it over time, and in fact, continuously. And so we've introduced a number of new products and new capabilities to help customers make that edge transformation from kind of just the simple deploying an edge device to something where it's actually a complete CI/CD type environment where you're continuously making changes to the software that you've deployed and making sure that it is up to date. Because as we see over the past few years, there's this rapid increase in the machine economy. Robotics in particular is one of the areas where we've seen huge amounts of increased activity simply because there are things that machines can do better than humans can do. And also, as you're probably aware, there's been a rather big shortage of humans to do a lot of things. After we came out of COVID, we found that there were a lot of people that said they, really didn't want to do menial work anymore. They wanted to do things that were more purposeful for them. And so that's a key area where we've seen robots and machine economy really grow up. And at the same time, we've also seen that the introduction of AI and the need to process data, you can't bring everything back into your main data center and process it. A lot of the stuff has to be processed at the edge. The decisions have to be made, right where the device is. And so that's where the intelligent edge comes in. And it also ties into this kind of complete development environment where we're continuously integrating, continuously deploying, and continuing to drive, new changes to the software in almost real time as the needs for the software need to evolve. So all of that's kind of the backdrop of where we see Wind River Linux today. Now, if you next slide, please. Now, for someone who's developing an edge solution, there are a lot of issues they have to worry about. Obviously, time to market is one of the big ones. How long will it take me to get my solution developed, deployed, and in the marketplace so that I can compete? There's hardware enablement. That's one of the key factors that comes into what Wind River does, is doing hardware enablement. It's certainly one thing to have the hardware enabled by the manufacturer, by someone like Intel, but then once you've enabled it, you need to be able to support that for a long period of time. And as the SDKs and the capabilities of the hardware change, we need to respond to that and deliver, upcoming, new capabilities to our customers. Portability is also very important. As new generations of hardware come out, we need to make sure that the solution that you built on the version 1 hardware now works with the version 2 or the succeeding generations. So portability is very important, not being tied exactly to one particular platform. You need to be able to expand as the capabilities of the hardware platforms evolve. Obviously, in a edge type environment, we're often dealing with a lot of device constraints, whether it's the memory or the processing power or even the communication speed. All of those things kind of limit what you can do. And that means that you have to make your application be to work in those kinds of environments. And that means that your underlying operating system also needs to be cognizant of that. Cost is one of the big factors. It's one thing if you're deploying, say 100 enterprise machines, but if you're developing and deploying 10,000 devices that are out on the edge, you need to have a cost structure for that, such that what you're paying for your operating system and other capabilities doesn't overwhelm kind of the value that you can deliver to the edge. Now, I mentioned long-term maintenance and support before. This is increasingly important. We've seen all sorts of hacks over the years, ways that people have used edge devices to penetrate back to their host networks. So making sure that you address CVEs as soon as possible so that any openings that are out there can be remedied so that you have a secure environment. Now, one of the other areas that people now have to worry about is export and the software bill of materials. Export considerations, particularly if you're deploying devices that are going around the world, which most of our customers are. But software bill of materials is also very important. In fact, there are new regulations from the US government that require that particular applications need to be able to show what software they're running, what the sources of that software are. And in many cases, you need to understand things like what are the licenses tied around this. Now, I've been in the open and proprietary industry for a long time, operating systems, and I've never seen a company like Wind River that really goes down to the absolute nth level, looking at each particular package to make sure that there are no restrictions or anything that would cause someone a problem when they deploy a solution based on our operating system. So all of that, export compliance, that all really ties together. And of course, this is not easy stuff in a lot of cases. There are a lot of times when you're going to need assistance. And Wind River provides not only kind of the normal traditional support assistance where you can call in and get answers, but we actually have a very strong, very skilled set of professional services folks that are able to help you with everything from porting a board support package to actually helping you to architect your solution from soup to nuts, or even helping you to kind of, design what you're going to do. So we have a lot of capabilities there. These are really some of the big problems that we have. Now, if you go forward, next slide, please. I mean, Wind River Linux really is purpose-built to enable our customers' embedded solutions. That is our entire focus. We're not an enterprise vendor that's trying to go down market. We're not some little company that's off to the side kind of providing some boutique services around Linux. We're really designed and built around being able to enable our customers to develop their embedded solutions and support them once they've been deployed. Now, there are a lot of choices out there. Wind River Linux, even though we are the leading Linux in the embedded environment, we really have about 30+% of market share. So there are a lot of different potentials out there. And in fact, there are over 400 different Linux distributions available in the marketplace today. And so a lot of times people look at this and go, well, Linux is free. Why don't I just build it myself? If you could go forward to the next slide, please. And so that's really kind of making the decision, should I build something or should I buy something? And one of the things you have to think about is what is the best use of my engineering resources? I remember working with a small company that had about a 6-man engineering team, and they had 4 of those engineers that were full-time just focusing on maintaining the Linux operating system that was underneath their solution. Now, that effort didn't really provide a lot of value to their customers. It was basically overhead that this company had taken on, and they were trying to figure out, how do I get out of this? Scroll forward, please. You need to think about this. Am I going to support this for years and years and years? Embedded environments tend to be deployed, for upwards of 18 to 20 years, kind of, in a normal state. And while you're doing that, there's a huge number of CVEs, a huge number of security exposures that come out all the time. How do I deal with all these different factors? I mentioned export and compliance. Those are things that typically are not going to be in the skill set of a Linux engineer that you hire to help you build your own environment. And of course, while things are changing all the time, so you can't be stale either. Scroll forward, please. And so, roll your own Linux tends to look very cheap at the beginning. Gee, I'll just download it and build it and I'm up and running. Scroll forward, please. But, once you've actually got it out there, you have to maintain it for a long period of time. You have to maintain currency. You have to manage CVEs. And so that's why we think that it makes more sense for most customers to buy their solution, buy their operating system solution from Wind River than to roll their own. Even though it seems like the costs are cheaper at the beginning, the reality is that over time you will end up spending a lot more time, resource, and have a lot more headaches if you try to do it yourself. Next slide, please. Now, just an illustration of this, I mentioned the number of CVEs that come out. CVEs, basically come out, somebody says, I found an exposure in this particular area. It's assigned a number, it's tracked. But then you have to look at it. Somebody has to triage it. They have to examine each one of those CVEs and determine, is that particular exposure, is that something that my customers might hit? Is it something that they're vulnerable to or not vulnerable to? Do I need to deliver a fix for that if it is a vulnerability? And then there's some where you go, just no, I'm not going to fix it, because even though there's a potential vulnerability, the reality is that in this particular environment, they would never be hit. Now, I had to put this together in a log scale just to show the number of CVEs, because it ranges, but you can see that in general, around 1,000 CVEs a month have to be evaluated by our engineers to determine whether or not we need to create a fix, or if no fix is needed, because it's not vulnerable or it simply wouldn't come up in our customer's environment. So that's a lot of work that has to be done, regardless of what your solution is or anything else. You need to ensure that your environment is secure, and that's one of the real value adds that we provide here with Wind River Linux. Scroll forward, please. Now, I mentioned, one of the big things about embedded Linux is one size does not fit all. When I worked at companies like SUSE or IBM, the operating system was basically one big size. It had a particular memory footprint, required a certain amount of processing capacity, and it had a certain amount of response over time. That was good for a commercial environment. It's not good for an embedded environment. And so that's why we really need this kind of purpose-built Linux. And you can see a couple of examples here that are looking at memory footprint versus things like thread latency. And I will point out that Wind River Linux does offer both the standard Linux kernel and the preempt RT kernel. And for a lot of applications, the preempt RT responsiveness is enough for a customer to deploy their application without having to use a proprietary RTOS. They can build it on top of a Linux environment. So, this is one of the things that's really important to understand, is that you need to have your Linux that's supporting your solution actually kind of be purpose built for your environment. Next. Now, Wind River's been in this business a long time. We have a number of different solutions, a number of different paths to a purpose-built Linux. And I'll address some of these in more detail later, but let's just kind of look at the overall view. So the first thing that we have is what's called Wind River Linux LTS, long-term support. That is our source-based, based on Yocto project, that allows a solution developer to control every aspect of their Linux environment. Not only what packages are involved, but kernel operands, all sorts of capabilities in a very detailed manner. Now, that's a really good solution. We have a number of customers that are using that across many different industries, particularly in telecommunications, where latency is important, but automotive, industrial, what have you. That is kind of the top of the mark for customizability and capability. The downside is, if you've ever worked with Yocto project or any other kind of distro builders, you understand there's a fair amount of complexity there and a pretty big learning curve dealing with that. But we have a lot of customers that are using that today, and that's a great solution for those particular customers that need that ultimate customizability. Now, as we evolved our solution over time, we had some people that said, it's really good to get the LTS release, every year, but I need to be more on the bleeding edge. I need to be continuously developing based on changes in the underlying hardware. And we've seen this from a number of different hardware vendors in the industry. Just like anything else, hardware tends to be a bit iterative. So the first version you get, you roll it out, you put it out on the market. People realize that there are ways to get more capability out of it, so they alter the SDK or even alter the hardware. And so that's kind of a continuously changing thing. And so we also offer something called the Wind River Linux Continuous Delivery. And that's basically the LTS release kind of preview version. So we do sprints about every 3 weeks, and we deliver not only the kind of the LTS kernel Linux, but we also have alternative kernels in there, as well as updates to the board support programs or packages. And so that's something for customers that really need to be on the real bleeding edge. Now, Wind River Linux LTS and the CD release are both distro builders. In other words, we're not shipping you a distribution, we're shipping you the means to build your own distribution. Now, earlier this year, we introduced something called Wind River Linux Distro. It is, in fact, a distribution, a binary distribution. So if you're used to using Ubuntu or CentOS or something like that, you'll be very familiar with this type of distro. But it is, once again, focused on being a purpose-built distribution. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all. It comes with a set of tools that we'll talk about in more detail that gives you the capabilities to really customize what you put into that operating system image, so that you're making sure that you have just enough OS there that provides exactly the functionality you need, with nothing extra that can provide additional attack vectors or additional footprint. Now, those first 3 products are all things that we provide as commercial products from Wind River Linux. We also realize, though, that there are a lot of customers out there, potential customers, who've gone down the path of saying, hey, I'm going to take Yocto project, I'm going to build my solution on that. And they develop that, they kind of go through that build your own process, roll your own process. And they get out there and they go, well, okay, this is great. I was able to roll my own and get it out and drive it into the industry. But gee whiz, now I got to keep up with all these CVEs. I got to keep up with these patches. I got to keep up with all of these things. And so what we provide for those customers is something called Studio Linux services. So those are services that are specifically aimed at Yocto project customers, people that are using Yocto project, not using Wind River Linux, as well as additional services that we provide around Wind River Linux. So that's a suite of services that are designed to help someone who's already chosen Yocto project or another distro and now realize that they've got some headaches managing that. Okay, let's go into a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. So Yocto project, as I was introduced earlier, Wind River brings commercial support to Yocto project Linux. So Yocto project is a very large project. There's thousands of people that participate in it. And Wind River is one of the founding members of this. We do provide commercial support, so we provide you with bug fixes and CVE fixes. We do not charge device royalties. So if you're used to using something like, let's say, Red Hat, where you have an individual device charge for each device, we don't do that. We provide a kind of a charge metric based on projects, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. We do offer long-term support, a minimum of 10 years, and as you'll see, even more than that. I mentioned the CI/CD release for customers that really need to be on the edge of the edge, so they really need to keep up with the latest trends. We provide SDKs for application development. So we're not just providing the OS, we're providing you with the tools to be able to build your application on top of that. And as you'll see later on, and deploy and manage those things. Now, I mentioned the export and license management. This is something that is an ongoing task. So every release that we ship of Wind River Linux, or every update, which we call rolling cumulative patch layers, we actually go through and look at every single file to make sure that the licenses haven't changed, that there's not something in there that would restrict our customers from being able to commercially develop and deploy that. Documentation is a big part of what we provide as well. We have a very extensive set of documentation, and as I'll even talk about some of the things that we do specifically around the distro to help you understand. I want to start out to build a solution. How do I get started with something like Wind River Distro, and how do I customize it? For our existing customers, they get proactive CVE management. So we keep track of which CVEs are out there. As I showed you that example earlier where we evaluate, thousands every month, we provide that information to our customers so that they know, if there's an exposure, what the fix is for it, or if there is no exposure. I mentioned the binary distribution, which is kind of the focus of this presentation, and the skilled professional services. And I will tell you that I've worked in a number of companies over the years, have never seen a company with as much capability in professional services as I do at Wind River. And that's including some really big companies like IBM. So we really have a lot of capabilities in that area. Next slide, please. So this just kind of gives you an overview of how things flow in and out of the Yocto project to Wind River. So you can see up there on the Yocto project, there are major releases like 3.3, like 4.0 that come out periodically. So Yocto project does 2 releases per year. We do 1 major LTS release per year and distro release per year today. So we do every other release, though we do continuously integrate stuff into our CI/CD branch. Now you'll notice that there are arrows flowing down to us and arrows flowing back to us. So we also are one of the biggest contributors to the Yocto project, and that's something that's ongoing. Excuse me, particularly in the area of board support packages. We do a lot of work there. Integrating board support packages and then contributing those back to the Yocto project. So supporting a particular hardware platform is not a one and done type thing for us. We will often refresh a BSP 2 or even 3 times a year as the hardware vendor changes the underlying hardware or their SDK to provide more capabilities to our customers. So once we decide to make a major release, such as Wind River Linux LTS 22, we'll then flow down out of our CD release into what's called the base release. This is the open source. It's freely available to everybody. Anybody can go to that base release, pick it up, start building with it. Obviously, you won't get any support from us, but if you want to try out the source-based release, that's certainly available. Now, once we go through all the testing and qualification and BSP porting and things like that, we will release an LTS release. We most recently did this back in September with LTS 22. That was based on the Linux LTS kernel 5.15, as well as the Yocto project LTS release 4.0. And so that will come out, basically every year. Now, the Wind River Linux distro that I'm going to talk in more detail about in a moment is based on that LTS release, so it's built from it. So it is a key part of, it is based on our LTS product, but it kind of takes the headache from you having to build everything. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned, a couple of times now that compliance is very important to us. So we do spend a lot of time looking at every bit of code that goes out there. And you'd be surprised at the things that we find. Occasionally we'll find code that has been in open source, been in Yocto project for, in some cases months or years, that actually have some problematic legal notices or problematic licenses in there. So this is something that we do for every single release. We provide a bill of materials so that you can understand exactly what's in there. And we're going to be extending that capability in the future to give you more information about not only what we provide, but also your own Linux, your own solution. Next slide, please. Now, particularly in the area of support for Intel processors, we've had a long partnership with Intel. In fact, we used to be part of Intel for a period there. So Wind River has had a special relationship with Intel for a long period of time. And you can see some of the different hardware platforms we call out as support. So obviously, there's quite a few x86 ones there. Both in the kind of the Atom or the smaller server space, even up into the commercial type space service. But our focus is primarily on the embedded space. So we do have some customers, particularly in the telcos, that need the the raw power that you can get from having a server kind of platform from Intel running in an embedded environment, managing things like telecommunications flows. You can see there in that list that we do support things other than the x86, so the Axia platforms are out there, as well as the Stratix 10 and Agilex F. So we have quite a few processors out there that we support and continue to upgrade as Intel changes the SDKs or comes out with new revs or their hardware or new hardware platforms altogether. I will point out that we have this thing called the BSP query tool. So if you're interested in what we support for a particular hardware platform, that tool will provide you that information. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that long-term support is important for embedded environments. And this just kind of gives you an overview of the Linux releases that have been out there. This isn't all of them, but it's quite a few of them. And you'll see that, for something like LTS 21, that support's going to go out there for at least 10 years, so out there to 2032. Same thing with the earlier versions. Point out like LTS 17 came out in November of 2017. That's going to be out there till, probably 2029. So we provide a minimum of 10 years of support. I will tell you that I have customers running Linux 6, which has been end of life for a couple of years now. We still provide support for those customers through our professional services organization. So if you've got a solution that you intend to deploy out there and have out for a long time, we will continue to support Linux for a long time. And I will say that, we have a mix of customers out there of customer behaviors. Some of our customers like to get on a particular Linux version and stay on it for the life of their product. There are other customers, particularly telecommunications vendors, that are always looking to move to the most recent Linux, the latest kernel, the latest capabilities. So we have a mixture of those, but one thing you can understand is that we do support up to 10 years of support minimum for each of our Linux releases. And in most cases, we have customers using them well beyond 10 years. This also shows the yearly cadence there. So in September of this year, we released LTS 22. You can expect an LTS 23 next year at the same time, and an LTS 24 the year after that. So as Linux moves forward, so we're expecting, for example, that LTS 23 will probably be built on the Linux 6.1 kernel, and Yocto project is also evolving. So we also pick up the latest Yocto version when we come out with a new LTS release. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we've had this source-based distro builder for a long time, but we introduced this distro as a new option for customers to be able to get up and running much more quickly. And so what we provide here is a set of hardware platforms, hardware images that install and expand to use all the space. We provide an SDK and a number of tools like the Linux assembly tool that help you design, which packages, which features you need to have in your image that your solution needs to be built on. So you can certainly use it for rapid prototyping, and we have customers doing that. But more importantly, we have customers that say, I really like having a build your own Linux, but it does require a lot of work on my part. I'd like to just be able to consume a binary distro that is intended for an embedded space. And in fact, if you go to the next slide, I have a quick overview of, which one do you choose, between the source and the binary. Kind of the real thing that I point out is if you're looking for full control of the kernel in particular, you're probably going to be a customer that's going to need to use the LTS, the source-based OS builder. But if you don't need that capability, if you maybe only need some kernel device drivers or things like that, that we can do quite easily with the binary distro, then you're probably better off with the binary distro. It's easier, faster, quicker time to value, provides the same kind of support that we support for our source release, but it's really intended for people that are kind of used to iteratively building their solution. So they try something out and they go, gee, I needed to have this package in there. They go back, customize it, tweak their image a little bit, add some packages, maybe remove some packages, and then kick it out. And gee, now they've got a solution that's out there. And one of the things that's important about the Wind River Linux distro is that we provide updates to it via the OS tree. So we have OS tree updates is that every RCPL, we come out with new updates for the binary distro. That means that if there's a CVE that's been fixed, then customers can pick that up without having, once again, to rebuild the whole thing. We also provide package feeds. So in the source-based product, you select which packages you're going to build and include in the image. In the Wind River Linux distro, we provide you with a set of package feeds, and you can use the DNF tool to add and remove packages to your image so that you get something that, once again, is purpose-built. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned earlier that we've kind of seen this digital transformation where people are not just deploying, building some solution, deploying it and moving on. They're really developing and deploying complex solutions that requires really kind of a cloud native development approach. And so that's what we provide with Wind River Studio. Wind River Studio is a tool that provides not only the cloud-based development environment, but also a deployment environment and a managed environment. So you can develop, deploy, operate in an iterative basis. So as you make new changes, as you make changes to your application, you can continue to deploy those out to your endpoints, manage those, keep track of what's going on, and really manage the entire environment for your solution. Now, obviously, if you're making something really simple, like let's say a digital thermostat, you probably don't need these kind of capabilities. But if you're doing something that like a telecommunications infrastructure, router infrastructure, or even some complex aerospace systems, you're going to need these kind of capabilities to make sure that you're able to develop in a modern approach and deploy those, manage those over the life of a project that might last decades. And so Wind River Studio brings that full lifecycle management capability to you. Next slide, please. And so, in summary, Wind River does have this extreme customizability to provide that purpose-built Linux. We have a full suite of products, not just Linux, but also our RTOS, VxWorks, and our hypervisor, Helix virtualization platform, as well as Wind River Studio, to be able to manage the entire environment. We take care of managing threats for you. What we're really about here with Wind River Linux and Wind River in general is really reducing the risk to you. So as you develop and deploy your embedded solution, we're there to make sure that you're successful. And we've got a lot of work there that you see that we provide. But the bottom line is we're here to help you be successful at creating and deploying and managing your embedded solution. And you can try us free, right? If you go to that URL you see there at the bottom, you can download the binary distribution, or you can even download the source-based distribution, the base distribution, to be able to give it a try. So, go out and try it today. Doesn't cost you anything to try it out, and you can use our full set of documentation to be able to try that out. So moving forward, please. So that's really what I had for you today. I want to thank again Intel for providing me with this opportunity to talk to you. I want to thank all of you for participating, whether now live or in a recorded environment. And I think after this, we move forward to the questions. So thank you.
Jay, thanks a million for that excellent explanation on the products that Wind River has. So the time we've got about looks like about 13 minutes. We do have plenty of time for some questions. So if you have questions, feel free to type in the chat window or use the audio. No questions have come in yet. So what I'll do is I'll go to the pre-registration questions here. Okay, so here's a good question. How is the Wind River Linux distribution different from other Linux distributions like Red Hat or Ubuntu?
Yeah, so other Linux distributions, and I did spend part of my career, I worked at SUSE for a while, are really focused on providing kind of a generic solution, a one size fits all. And so if whether it's Ubuntu or Red Hat or SUSE or what have you, they're looking in delivering a commercial Linux that they can scale across the maximum number of customers. And so what they do is build an environment, an operating system that will, boot in a lot of different environments. It will It will work, pretty well for most things, but it's not really tailored to an embedded environment. They really tend to be more tailored towards kind of commercial server environments. There are some that kind of nibble around the edges with an embedded environment. One of the things you have to be real careful of for any of those kind of commercial distributions is understanding what their licensing model is. As I mentioned earlier, Wind River's model is that we charge you based on a project. So if you're going to build, let's say, a blood analysis unit, okay, from our point of view, that is a single project. We'll charge you a single fee. For the source-based product is $100,000 or $50,000 for the binary distro, and we'll provide you with all the support you need. And we don't care whether you deploy 1,000, 10,000, or 100,000 of those things. We're really focused on a project-based pricing model. That's very different than what you would see in most of the other commercial vendors. Most of the other commercial vendors do provide a device-based charge, and so that can run up very quickly, particularly if you're in a space, like automotive, where the number of units that you ship are very large.
All right, thank you, Jay. Let's see. Go again to the list of registration questions here. Okay, here's one. Who is the maintainer for the SOC FPGA on kernel.org?
So maybe I could help answer that one, Jay. So
Okay.
the maintainer for SOC FPGA on kernel.org is actually Intel. Intel maintains the SOC FPGA branches on kernel.org.
All right, thank you, Finlay. Okay, here's another question. So let's say a customer needs to use a non-standard kernel device driver. How can I do that with the Wind River Linux distro?
Right. So we actually ran into this very early on with some of our first customers for Wind River Linux distro. It was a customer that was doing a medical device, and they needed a very old CAN bus driver. And so what we were able to do is actually help that customer build that driver using that source base release that I mentioned earlier today. So that base release is Wind River Linux, our source-based product. We were able to use that to build that device driver to enable that customer so that they can then turn around and include it in their image and deploy it to their end devices.
Great,
And that,
thank you.
that, by the way, is well documented in our documentation, that process.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so no questions yet from our audience, so I'll still draw on the registration questions here. Let's see, do you provide commercial support for the Wind River Linux distribution?
The answer is yes, we do provide commercial support for a subset of platforms. So we just started out with Wind River Linux distro back in May of last year. And so we're ramping it up as we get customer requirements for commercial support. We provide it. But we do have a much larger list of devices that we provide for free with no support. So if you go to that free download page there, you'll see a list of devices that is actually larger than our commercial support. We tend to focus our commercial support when we actually have customer demand, and since it's a new product, we'll be adding that slowly over time.
Okay, let's see another question here. What features does rocketboards.org provide for the SOC space?
Okay, I can handle that. So yeah, rocketboards.org, as I mentioned earlier, is our community-based wiki for our open source software. And again, I think I mentioned that it's documentation that includes, getting started, kind of out of the box experience, tutorials, things like release notes. It's also got reference designs, latest news from, in our software, where we are from a version point of view, bug fixes, CVE patches. There's also support via a forum. There are projects there as well, and what boards are supported for the product portfolio, which covers Cyclone 5, ARIA 5, ARIA 10, Stratix 10, and Agilex SOC FPGAs.
Right. Thank you, Finlay. I actually have a follow-on question for the maintaining the SOC on FPGA on kernel.org. Could you explain a little bit of the process on how that is maintained on kernel.org? Like, how frequently is it updated? Bug fixes or contributions or stuff of that matter. Could you share some details with that?
Could Dean, are you still on the call?
Yeah. So
Could you
yeah.
maybe
So my
help?
name's Dean Nguyen. I'm actually the maintainer for the SOC FPGA support on kernel.org. Our process is always upstream first. So whenever drivers are available on new SOCs, we always try to upstream the code to the upstream community first. Um, we try to always stay in the latest kernel. So we're on 6.0 right now. We're testing it, and it should be out in a couple weeks here. Yeah, so I mean, we're constantly upstreaming support and backporting fixes and things like that.
Thanks, Dan. And then a follow-up on there. Is there a regular cadence on when the kernel gets updated? With
Yeah,
contributions
so
or fixes?
yeah, typically the kernel.org new kernel, there's usually 4 kernels a year. So typically the cadence cycle is every 3 months or so. We take an extra 2 or 3 weeks to kind of upgrade our downstream kernel. So apply we have a list of downstream patches that are that we apply on top of the kernel.org, and then we take a couple weeks, test it, make sure everything's good, and then we release it out to GitHub. And then the LTS kernel that we maintain, those get updated pretty frequently because of CVE. So like right now, the 5.15 LTS, we're on 5.15.70. And I believe the community's on 76 because of just a steady flow of CVE fixes, bug fixes that get reapplied.
Okay, let's see. There are a couple of questions here. Okay, so I think I'll address the most recent one first. Has Intel considered more accurately labeling these sessions? While I appreciate the information provided, it felt more like a 45-minute commercial for Wind River than Ask an Expert. Okay, thank you. Thank you for bringing that comment back in. Noted, and we will make sure to appropriately label these Ask an Experts in the future. Thank you for that comment there. Another question comes in here. How easy is it to set up a CI/CD pipeline with Wind River Linux? Would it use a physical board or an emulated one?
Yeah, so it is very easy, particularly with Studio. That's what it was designed for, was to set up a CI/CD pipeline. We can use both physical boards, a board. We actually have a board library, where you can try it out on boards that not in your physical location, as well as simulated boards. So we kind of run the gamut. We have a product called Simix that is a simulation tool that's actually done in partnership with Intel, and so we have customers that are actually developing based on environments where they don't actually have a physical board yet.
Okay, thank you. And let's see, I do have one more pre-registration question here. What reference designs does Intel provide?
Yeah, so the reference designs are again primarily designs that are supported and maintained, so we keep them up to date with the latest versions of software and tools. And there's a number of reference designs. Their basic reference design is known as the golden hardware reference design, and that's what we call our out-of-the-box experience. So that's if you buy a development kit, you download our tools and our software, you would use that to show proof of life as a kind of a starting point. But on top of that, there are multiple reference designs, again, that are supported and maintained, including things like partial reconfiguration, PCIe root port. We have a 10 gigabit Ethernet with 1588, a 25 gigabit Ethernet with 1588, SGMII, and many other reference designs are available, but one is stressed that we keep them updated, we keep them supported, again, with the latest versions of our software and our tools.
Okay, thank you, Finlay. I think I'm going to do a last call for questions. I don't have any more pre-registration questions. Any questions from our audience? Right. I think that wraps up this month's Ask an Expert session. Thank you, everyone, for the contributions. Oh, let's see. There is one last question. Okay, thank you. Let's see here. Which is the latest version of Yocto I can use?
There may be two answers to this. I know from an Intel point of view, we're currently on Kirkstone, which I think is version 4.
Yep.
Version 4. Okay, thank you for that last question. Got in right there under the gun. Okay, thank you everybody, and thank you to Jay and Finlay and Dina as well for the contributions of this session's Ask an Expert. Like I mentioned before, the recording will be provided for if you know colleagues that you think would be interested in something like this. We'll have that out. We'll send an email out with that, and let's see, a feedback link. Oh, let's see. I did not get the feedback in the chat window. I apologize for that. That was overlooked this time, but we do have one item of feedback, and thank you for that feedback there. We will take that. We'll bring it up in our next team meeting, and that's it. So thank you, everybody, and we will. I'll stop the recording here in just a minute.